Billionaire buys a poor single mother at an auction, then finds out who she really is. Is there anything more degrading than being auctioned off like an object? The story you're going to hear today will show how desperation can lead a person to the darkest places, but also how love can arise in the most unlikely circumstances. Get your tissues ready, because this narrative will deeply move you. If you love stories that touch the heart, click subscribe now. Damien Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, surveying an empire built on ruthless ambition and cold calculation. At 34, he controlled Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, a company worth $12 billion that dominated global markets through aggressive acquisitions and patent manipulation. His penthouse occupied 3 entire floors of the city's most exclusive building, filled with art worth more than small countries' GDP. But for all his material success, Damien was a man haunted by profound loss. 15 years earlier, his younger sister Sarah had died of leukemia at age 12. Despite having access to the best medical care money could buy, despite experimental treatments and world-renowned specialists, Sarah had lost her battle with the disease. Her death had shattered Damien's faith in everything except the pursuit of wealth and power. Since Sarah's death, Damien had become increasingly isolated and cynical. He trusted no one, loved nothing, and viewed all human relationships as potential liabilities or business opportunities. His romantic life consisted of brief encounters with models and socialites who were attracted to his wealth but repelled by his emotional unavailability. Damien's business practices were as cold as his personal relationships. Blackwood Pharmaceuticals was known for acquiring smaller biotech companies, stripping their assets, and hiking prices on life-saving medications. Damien justified these tactics as necessary for funding research and development, but critics accused him of profiting from human suffering. His penthouse reflected his personality, beautiful but sterile, expensive but emotionally vacant. Every piece of furniture, every work of art, every architectural detail had been chosen for its market value rather than personal meaning. It was the home of a man who had everything money could buy, but nothing that money couldn't replace. Damien's social circle consisted entirely of other ultra-wealthy individuals who shared his view of life as a zero-sum competition. He belonged to exclusive clubs where membership cost more than most people's lifetime earnings, attended charity galas that were really networking events for the super-rich, and participated in elaborate games and bets that treated ordinary people's lives as entertainment. The only person Damien genuinely cared about was his elderly grandmother, Margaret Blackwood, who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. Margaret was dying of Alzheimer's disease in the world's most expensive memory care facility, gradually losing recognition of the grandson who visited her daily, despite knowing she might not remember him. Across the city, in a 4th-floor walk-up apartment in Queens, Isabel Chen lived a completely different existence. At 28, she was a single mother working multiple jobs to support her 5-year-old daughter Sophie and pay for Sophie's leukemia treatments. Isabel's life was a constant battle against poverty, illness, and despair. She worked the night shift at a medical supply warehouse, cleaned offices on weekends, and took in sewing work during whatever free time remained. Every penny was allocated to rent, groceries, or Sophie's mounting medical bills that insurance refused to cover. The apartment Isabel and Sophie shared was tiny but immaculate, filled with love despite lacking material comforts. Sophie's artwork covered the refrigerator. Library books were stacked everywhere because they couldn't afford to buy them, and every meal was carefully planned to stretch their food budget through the month. But Isabel possessed qualities that Damien's wealth couldn't buy: unconditional love for her daughter, unshakable moral principles, and an inner strength forged by surviving challenges that would have destroyed weaker people. She had put herself through nursing school while pregnant, learned medical terminology to better advocate for Sophie's care, and maintained hope even when doctors delivered devastating news about her daughter's prognosis. Isabel's world revolved entirely around Sophie, a brilliant, brave little girl who faced cancer treatments with more courage than most adults showed facing minor inconveniences. Sophie drew pictures of the family they would be when she got better, asked thoughtful questions about everything around her, and somehow maintained a sunny disposition despite spending more time in hospitals than playgrounds. The irony, neither Damien nor Isabel yet understood was that their lives were about to intersect in the most degrading circumstances imaginable, and that this intersection would ultimately save them both from their respective forms of desperation. Damien's desperation was emotional, a billionaire so isolated by wealth and grief that he had forgotten how to feel genuine human connection. Isabel's desperation was financial, a mother so overwhelmed by medical debt that she was about to make a choice that would challenge everything she believed about her own dignity and worth. Both were about to discover that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, and that love can bloom even in soil poisoned by inequality, exploitation, and human suffering. The Charity Companion Auction was Manhattan's most controversial annual event, a gathering where the city's wealthiest men bid on dates with women. Desperate enough to auction themselves for money, officially marketed as fundraising for various charities, it was really an opportunity for billionaires to purchase companionship while maintaining the fiction of philanthropy. Damien had never attended such events before, finding them distasteful even by his cynical standards. But his business partner, Richard Sterling, had insisted his presence was necessary to maintain relationships with potential investors who would be attending. "It's networking, Damien," Richard explained over dinner at their usual exclusive restaurant. "Half the pharmaceutical industry's financing gets decided at events like this. You don't have to participate, just show up, shake hands, make an appearance." Damien agreed reluctantly, viewing the evening as another tedious business obligation. He had no interest in bidding on anyone and planned to leave as soon as he had fulfilled his social duties. Meanwhile, across the city, Isabel was having the worst day of her life. Sophie's latest round of test results had revealed that the cancer was no longer responding to standard treatments. The experimental therapy that offered their only hope would cost $50,000. Money that might as well have been $50 million given Isabel's financial situation. Isabel had exhausted every option. Medical loans, charity programs, crowdfunding campaigns, appeals to pharmaceutical companies for compassionate use programs. Every door had closed, every application had been denied, every hope had been systematically destroyed by bureaucracy and corporate indifference. That afternoon, sitting in the oncology ward, watching Sophie sleep fitfully after another brutal chemotherapy session, Isabel had been approached by a woman named Victoria Manning, a well-dressed stranger who claimed to know about her situation. "I represent an organization that helps families in your circumstances," Victoria had said, her voice carefully modulated to sound both sympathetic and professional. "We can provide the $50,000 you need for Sophie's treatment." "What a kind of organization?" Isabel had asked suspiciously. "Wealthy individuals who want to help deserving families. There are ways to earn the money quickly if you're open to unconventional opportunities." Victoria had then explained about the auction, describing it as a high-end charity event where successful women raised money for important causes by offering their time and companionship to generous donors. "It's completely legitimate," Victoria had insisted. "You would be bidding on a dinner date, maybe attendance at a charity gala. These are gentlemen who understand the boundaries of appropriate behavior." Isabel's every instinct had screamed warnings about the proposal, But watching Sophie's fragile form in the hospital bed, seeing the monitors tracking her daughter's failing vital signs, Isabel had felt her principles crumbling under the weight of maternal desperation. "How much money?" Isabel had whispered. "Most. Dates go for between $10,000 and $20,000. An attractive woman like you, with a compelling story, could easily earn what you need in a single evening." The number had hit Isabel like a physical blow. $20,000, more than she earned in an entire year of back-breaking work. Enough to save Sophie's life. What exactly would I have to do? Spend an evening with a generous man who wants to support your daughter's medical care. Dinner, conversation, perhaps dancing. Nothing more than what any woman might do on a normal date. Victoria had made it sound almost respectable, like a job interview rather than human trafficking disguised as charity. But Isabel wasn't naive. She understood exactly what kind of evening these men would expect for their money. Still, watching Sophie struggle for breath, Isabel had found herself considering the unthinkable. "I need to think about it," she had said finally. "Of course, but the auction is tomorrow night, and opportunities like this don't come often. Here's my card if you decide you want to save your daughter's life." That night, Isabel had lain awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the most agonizing decision of her life. Every moral principle she had ever held was at war with her maternal instincts. How could she auction herself like merchandise? But how could she let Sophie die when salvation was within reach? In the morning, Isabel had called Victoria and agreed to participate. The auction was held in the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, decorated to look like a charity gala with elegant flowers, soft lighting, and classical music. The women participating had been styled by professional makeup artists and dressed in expensive gowns provided by the organizers. Backstage, Isabel waited with 12 other women in various states of financial desperation. There was Maria, an immigrant mother facing deportation unless she could pay for legal representation. Janet, a recent widow whose husband's medical bills had consumed their life savings. Caroline, a graduate student whose scholarships had been cut and who faced dropping out of medical school. Each woman had a story of crisis that had brought her to this point of selling herself to strangers. None of them spoke about what they were doing. The shame was too overwhelming for words. Imagine the humiliation. How can a desperate mother reach this point? Victoria briefed them on proper behavior, emphasizing the importance of appearing grateful and enthusiastic regardless of who won their companionship. "Remember, these are very important men," Victoria said. "Billionaires who could destroy your lives with a phone call if they're dissatisfied with your performance. Smile, be charming, and make them feel like they're getting excellent value for their investment." When it was Isabel's turn to walk onto the stage, she felt like she was floating outside her own body. The bright lights blinded her to the audience, but she could feel dozens of eyes evaluating her, like livestock at a county fair. "Gentlemen, we have Isabel, 28 years old, single mother working to save her daughter's life," the auctioneer announced, with the same enthusiasm he might have used to sell a racehorse. "Starting bid, $5,000. Conflito Crescent in the audience. Damien watched the proceedings with growing disgust. The other men around him were treating the auction like entertainment, making crude comments about the women's appearances, and speculating about what they might receive for their money. When Isabel appeared on stage, something about her caught Damien's attention in a way that surprised him. Unlike the other women who had tried to project confidence and seduction, Isabel looked genuinely terrified. Her hands trembled as she walked, her smile was forced and fragile, and her eyes reflected pure desperation rather than calculated manipulation. "5,000, called out James Hartwell, a pharmaceutical competitor known for his predatory business practices and rumored mistreatment of women. 7,000, responded another voice from the back of the room. Damien found himself studying Isabel's face as the bidding continued. He could see her fighting back tears, could observe her struggling to maintain composure while being reduced to a commodity. There was dignity in her bearing despite the degrading circumstances, and something about her obvious discomfort stirred unexpected protective instincts in Damien. 10,000, Hartwell called out, his voice carrying undertones that made Damien's skin crawl. Damien knew Hartwell's reputation with women. 2 former employees had filed sexual harassment lawsuits that had been quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. A college girlfriend had transferred schools mid-semester after dating him. The man was dangerous, and Isabel was clearly too vulnerable to protect herself. 15,000, Damien found himself saying, surprised by his own voice. The ballroom fell silent. Damien Blackwood rarely attended such events and had never participated in bidding. His entry into the auction sent ripples of shock through the audience. 20,000, Hartwell countered, now clearly irritated by the competition. Damien looked at Isabel again and saw something that hit him like a physical blow. Relief. She was looking at him with desperate gratitude, as if she recognized that he represented a less dangerous option than Hartwell. $50,000, Damien said calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. 50,000 was more than had ever been bid at such an auction, more than most attendees made in several months. Hartwell's face flushed with anger, but he couldn't justify matching such an enormous sum. Sold to Mr. Blackwood for $50,000, the auctioneer announced, barely able to contain his excitement at the record-breaking bid. $50,000! What was going through Damien's mind at this moment? As applause filled the ballroom, Damien felt a mixture of satisfaction and revulsion. He had saved Isabel from Hartwell, but he had also just purchased a human being like a piece of property. The transaction made him complicit in a system he found morally repugnant. After the auction, Damien waited in the hotel's private lounge as instructed. Isabel appeared 20 minutes later, having changed from her auction gown into her own simple dress. She looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and deeply ashamed. "Mr. Blackwood?" she said tentatively, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. And you're Isabel. I want you to know that I've never done anything like this before," Isabel said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. I don't usually. This isn't who I am." Damien studied her face and saw only truth in her desperate explanation. "What brought you here tonight?" Isabel's carefully maintained composure cracked. "My daughter has leukemia. She needs experimental treatment that costs $50,000, and I've exhausted every other option. I would do anything to save her life, even this." The mention of leukemia hit Damien like a punch to the stomach. Sarah's face flashed through his memory. His 12-year-old sister fighting the same disease, enduring treatments that ultimately failed to save her life. "How old is your daughter?" Damien asked, his voice rougher than he intended. 5. Her name is Sophie. Sarah had been only 7 years older when she died. Damien felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years, genuine compassion for another person's suffering. "Mr. Blackwood," Isabel continued, "I know what you paid for tonight and I'll honor our agreement, but I want you to know that my daughter is the only reason I'm here." Damien looked at this woman who was prepared to sacrifice her dignity for her child's life, and made a decision that would change both their worlds. "Isabel," he said gently, "I don't expect anything from you tonight except your company for dinner. Nothing more." Isabel stared at him in shock. "But you paid $50,000. "I paid $50,000 to keep you away from James Hartwell, who would have hurt you. The money is a donation to your daughter's medical care, not payment for services." Tears began flowing down Isabel's cheeks. "I don't understand. Why would you do that?" "Because I lost my sister to leukemia 15 years ago, and I know what your family is going through. No mother should have to choose between her dignity And her child's life. Isabel broke down completely, sobbing with relief and gratitude and shame all mixed together. Damien found himself wanting to comfort her, to somehow ease the pain he could see consuming her. "Let me take you home," Damien said softly. "You can see your daughter, and we can discuss how to get her the treatment she needs." "I can't accept charity from a stranger." "It's not charity. Consider it an investment in medical research. Your daughter's recovery will contribute to knowledge that might help other children with leukemia." Isabel looked at him with wonder and suspicion mixed. "Together? Who are you really, Mr. Blackwood? Someone who wishes he had been able to save his sister the way I might be able to help save your daughter?" The ride to Isabel's apartment in Queens was mostly silent, both of them processing the unexpected turn their evening had taken. Damien studied Isabel's profile as she stared out the window, noting the strength in her posture despite her obvious exhaustion. When they arrived at Isabel's building, she hesitated before getting out of the car. "Mr. Blackwood, would you like to meet Sophie? She's probably awake. She has trouble sleeping since the treatment started." Damien felt his heart racing. He hadn't been around children since Sarah's death, had avoided them deliberately because they reminded him too painfully of what he had lost. "I don't want to intrude." "Please," Isabel said, "I want her to meet the man who's going to save her life." Against his better judgment, Damien followed Isabel into the building and up 4 flights of stairs to her tiny apartment. The contrast with his penthouse was jarring. This was clearly the home of someone living paycheck to paycheck, but it was filled with warmth and love in ways his mansion had never been. Sophie was indeed awake, sitting up in her small bed reading a picture book by the light of a lamp shaped like a cartoon cat. When she saw her mother, her face lit up with joy. "Mommy, you're back. Hi, sweetheart, I brought someone to meet you. This is Mr. Blackwood." Sophie looked at Damien with the frank curiosity of a 5-year-old. Despite her obvious illness, she was thin and pale from chemotherapy, wearing a bright pink bandana to cover her hair loss. Her eyes sparkled with intelligence and life. "Are you Mommy's friend?" Sophie asked. "I hope so," Damien replied, surprised by how his voice caught in his throat. "Do you like to read? I'm reading about dinosaurs. Did you know that some dinosaurs were bigger than school buses? See how a child's innocence can change everything." For the next hour, Damien found himself sitting on Sophie's bed, listening to her chatter about dinosaurs, space exploration, and her dreams of becoming a scientist when she grew up. Sophie's enthusiasm and courage in the face of her illness reminded him painfully of Sarah, but also filled him with admiration for this remarkable little girl. Watching Damien interact with her daughter, Isabel began to see him differently. The cold businessman who had bid $50,000 at an auction was replaced by a man who listened seriously to a 5-year-old's questions and answered them with respect and genuine interest. When Sophie finally fell asleep, Damien and Isabel moved to the tiny living room. "She's incredible," Damien said softly. "She's my whole world," Isabel replied. "Mr. Blackwood, I still don't understand why you're helping us. What do you really want from me?" Damien considered the question seriously. What did he want? For 15 years, he had wanted nothing except the accumulation of wealth and power. But sitting in this modest apartment, watching a brave little girl fight the same disease that had killed his sister, Damien felt something awakening in him that he thought had died with Sarah. "I want to help Sophie get better," he said finally. "And I want to understand how you've managed to maintain such hope and love in the face of circumstances that would destroy most people." Isabel studied his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. "And after Sophie is better, what then?" "I don't know," Damien admitted. "I haven't thought beyond helping her get the treatment she needs." "Will you disappear back to your billionaire life and forget we ever existed?" The question hit Damien harder than he expected. Do you want me to? Isabel was quiet for a long moment. I don't know either. This is all so overwhelming. 6 hours ago, I was preparing to sell myself to save my daughter. Now a stranger has given us hope for her recovery. I don't know what to think or feel. Then don't think or feel anything right now except relief. Sophie is going to get the treatment she needs. Everything else we can figure out as we go. Isabel nodded, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Whatever your motives, whatever you expect from us, thank you for giving Sophie a chance. As Damien returned to his penthouse that night, he realized his carefully ordered world had been completely upended by one evening with a desperate mother and her dying daughter. For the first time since Sarah's death, he had a purpose beyond. Accumulating wealth, he was going to save Sophie Chen's life, but Damien had no idea that helping Sophie would ultimately save his own soul, or that the woman he had rescued from degradation would teach him everything he had forgotten about love, sacrifice, and what it meant to be truly human. 2 weeks after the auction, Damien had completely reorganized his life around Sophie's medical care. He hired the world's leading pediatric oncologists, arranged for experimental treatments at the best cancer research facilities, and ensured that Sophie had access to every possible therapeutic option. But more surprisingly, Damien found himself becoming emotionally invested in Sophie's daily life in ways that terrified and confused him. He visited the hospital every day, bringing books and games, listening to Sophie's stories about her dreams and fears, and gradually becoming the father figure she had never had. Isabel watched this transformation with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. The cold billionaire from the auction had been replaced by a man who read bedtime stories to her daughter, who remembered Sophie's favorite foods, who celebrated every small improvement in her condition as if it were a personal victory. "Why are you really doing this?" Isabel asked Damien one evening as they sat in Sophie's hospital room watching her sleep. "I told you, because of my sister. There's more to it than that. You're not just paying for treatment, you're becoming part of our lives." "Why?" Damien struggled to answer. The truth was that Sophie and Isabel had awakened feelings he thought were dead forever. Being around them reminded him what it felt like to care about something beyond money and power. "Maybe because I've spent 15 years trying to forget what it feels like to love someone, and being around Sophie makes me remember. And that doesn't scare you?" "It terrifies me," Damien admitted. "But watching Sophie fight this disease with such courage makes me want to be brave too." Isabel reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. It was the first time they had touched since the night of the auction, and Damien, who felt electricity shoot through his entire body. "Damien," Isabel said softly, "I need to tell you something I should have told you from the beginning." Damien felt his stomach clench. "What is it?" Isabel pulled a folder from her purse and handed it to him. "I lied about who I am. My real name isn't Isabel Chen, it's Isabel Morrison." The surname hit Damien like a physical blow. Morrison! He knew that name from his company's files, from legal documents, from a tragedy that had shaped his entire career. "Morrison," Damien repeated numbly. "David Morrison was my husband," Isabel said, tears beginning to flow. "Dr. David Morrison, the pediatric oncologist who worked at Children's Hospital 15 years ago." The world seemed to stop spinning around Damien. David Morrison, the young doctor who had treated Sarah during her final months, who had fought desperately to save her life, who had cried with the Blackwood family when she died. "David Morrison," Damien whispered. "He was Sarah's doctor." "Yes. And Sophie is his daughter. Can you believe this coincidence? Or was it destiny?" Damien stared at the folder Isabel had given him, containing David's medical degree, their marriage certificate, and Sophie's birth certificate listing David Morrison as her father. David died 3 years ago in a car accident, Isabel continued. He never got to see Sophie fight leukemia the way he helped so many other children fight it. But he always said that if anything happened to him, he hoped someone would care. For Sophie, the way he cared for his young patients. Damien felt tears streaming down his face as memories of David Morrison flooded back. The young doctor had been one of the few people who had truly understood the Blackwood family's grief. He had spent extra time with Sarah, had explained every procedure in terms she could understand, had made her laugh even during the most difficult treatments. On the night Sarah died, David had stayed with the family long after his shift ended. He had held Damien while he cried, had promised that Sarah's death would motivate him to find better treatments for other children with leukemia. "David told me about your sister," Isabel said softly. "He said losing Sarah was one of the hardest things he'd ever experienced as a doctor. He carried her memory with him throughout his career. So when you saw me at the auction, I recognized you immediately." David had shown me pictures from Sarah's memorial service. I couldn't believe that Harrison Blackwood's son was bidding on me at a human trafficking auction. Damien felt shame wash over him. "You must have thought I was exactly like every other predatory billionaire there." "I did, at first. But then you brought me home instead of to a hotel room. You met Sophie with such gentleness. You've spent 2 weeks caring for her like she was your own daughter. David would have said you were honoring Sarah's memory." Damien looked at Sophie sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, finally understanding the cosmic significance of their meeting. "It's not coincidence, is it? Sarah brought us together." "I believe she did. I think she wanted you to save Sophie the way David tried to save her." Damien felt something breaking open in his chest. 15 years of grief and guilt and emotional numbness cracking apart to make room for something he had thought was lost forever. "Isabel," he said, "there's something I need to tell you too. Something about how we really met." "What do you mean?" Damien took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either bring them closer together or destroy any chance of a relationship. "I didn't just happen to be at that auction. I was there on business, but I knew exactly what kind of event it was. I knew women were being exploited, and I participated anyway." Isabel's expression hardened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm complicit in a system that treats desperate women like commodities. I may have saved you from James Hartwell, but I still contributed to your degradation by participating in that auction." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because David loved you enough to marry you, and you deserve honesty from anyone who wants to be part of your life. Because Sophie deserves better than a man who profits from other people's suffering." Isabel was quiet for a long moment, processing Damien's confession. "Are you still that man, the one who sees desperate people as opportunities?" "I don't know," Damien said honestly. "I've spent my entire adult life being that man. But being around you and Sophie has shown me what I've been missing. I want to be better, but I don't know if I can change 15 years of conditioning." "David used to say that people could change if they had a strong enough reason," Isabel said finally. "What would be your reason?" Damien looked at Sophie, then at Isabel, then back at Sophie. "You too. I want to be worthy of being part of your family. Even if it means giving up the power and wealth that have defined your entire identity, especially if it means that." Isabel studied Damien's face, searching for sincerity or manipulation. "David also used to say that love was the most powerful force for healing in the universe, not just healing diseases, but healing broken people. Do you think I can be healed?" "I think," Isabel said carefully, "that you've already started healing. The man who bid $50,000 to protect a stranger from harm isn't the same man who built his fortune on other people's suffering." Damien felt a spark of hope for the first time in years. "What happens now?" "Now we focus on getting Sophie better, and we see if the man you're becoming can love us the way David did, completely, selflessly, with everything he had. And if I can, then maybe we can build something beautiful from the wreckage of that horrible night." As if summoned by their conversation, Sophie stirred in her sleep and opened her eyes. "Mommy, Damien, are you talking about Daddy?" Isabel and Damien exchanged glances, both recognizing that Sophie had inherited her father's intuitive understanding of human emotions. "Yes, sweetheart," Isabel said. "Damien knew Daddy when he was a doctor." Sophie looked at Damien with new interest. "Did Daddy help you when you were sick?" "Your daddy helped me in a different way," Damien said carefully. "He taught me how to be brave when I was scared." "Daddy was the bravest person ever," Sophie declared. "He used to tell me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." Damien felt those words settle into his heart like seeds in fertile soil. For the first time since Sarah's death, he wanted to be brave enough to love again. The revelation about David Morrison's connection to both families created an emotional earthquake that shook Damien to his core. For 3 days after Isabel's confession, he avoided the hospital entirely, unable to face the complex feelings that had been awakened by learning Sophie was the daughter of the doctor who had tried to save Sarah. Damien wandered through his empty penthouse like a ghost, haunted by memories of David Morrison's kindness during Sarah's final weeks. He remembered how David had explained complex medical procedures in terms a frightened 15-year-old could understand, how he had never given false hope, but had never abandoned hope either. Most painfully, Damien remembered David's promise. At Sarah's funeral, "I'll spend my career making sure other children have better chances than Sarah did. Her death won't be meaningless if it motivates us to find better treatments." Now, 15 years later, David Morrison's own daughter was fighting the same disease that had killed Sarah. The cosmic irony was overwhelming and devastating, but while Damien struggled with emotional turmoil in isolation, Isabel was facing a crisis of her own. Sophie's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse during Damien's absence. The experimental treatment that had shown initial promise was causing severe side effects, and Sophie was back in intensive care. "Where is Mr. Blackwood?" Sophie asked weakly from her hospital bed. "I want to show him the picture I drew of dinosaurs." Isabel had no answer. Damien had simply disappeared after their conversation about David, leaving behind only a promise to continue funding Sophie's treatment through his foundation. His financial support remained, but his emotional presence had vanished. He had to go away on business, Isabel lied, not wanting to burden Sophie with adult complications she couldn't understand. But Sophie was too intuitive to be fooled. "Did I say something wrong? Is he not coming back?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need time to think about complicated things. Like when you went away that night to get money for my medicine?" Isabel's heart broke at the reminder of the auction. Sophie had been told that her mother was attending a charity event to raise funds for medical treatment. Not technically a lie, but not the whole truth either. Something like that. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mommy, I think Damien is scared." "Scared of what? Of loving us and then losing us, like what happened with his sister?" Isabel stared at her 5-year-old daughter in amazement. "How do you know about his sister?" "He told me about her when he read me stories. He said she was brave like me and that sometimes he still talks to her when he's sad." "What else did he tell you?" "That he stopped believing in love when she died, but that meeting us made him want to believe again. But believing is scary when you've been hurt before." Isabel realized that while she and Damien had been dancing around their adult emotions and complications, Sophie had formed her own direct and honest relationship with him. Meanwhile, Damien was indeed struggling with terror about loving and losing again. The revelation about David Morrison had forced him to confront the emotional walls he had built after Sarah's death. For 15 years, he had convinced himself that caring about others was a weakness that led only to pain. But 3 weeks with Sophie had shattered those walls completely. He loved her with the same fierce protectiveness he had felt for Sarah, and the possibility of losing another child to leukemia was paralyzing. Damien's absence from the hospital was noticed by others as well. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, Sophie's primary oncologist, had observed the dramatic improvement in Sophie's spirits during Damien's visits and was concerned about his sudden disappearance. "The patient has been asking for Mr. Blackwood constantly," Dr. Harper told Isabel. "His presence has been genuinely therapeutic for her morale, which affects her physical recovery. Can you contact him?" "I've tried," Isabel replied. "He's not returning my calls." "Mrs. Morrison, I don't know what your relationship with Mr. Blackwood is, but Sophie needs all the emotional support she can get right now. If there's anything you can do to bring him back..." That evening, Isabel made a decision that required all her courage. She left Sophie with her neighbor and took a taxi to Damien's building, determined to confront him about his abandonment of her daughter. The doorman initially refused to let her up, but Isabel's desperation and fierce maternal anger eventually convinced him to call Damien's penthouse. "Tell him Sophie is asking for him," Isabel said firmly. "Tell him her mother needs to speak with him about his promises." 5 minutes later, Isabel found herself in an elevator rising to the top floors of Manhattan's most exclusive residential building. When the doors opened directly into Damien's penthouse, she was struck by the stark contrast between his world and hers. The penthouse was enormous, filled with priceless art and furniture, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the city. But it felt cold and empty, like a museum rather than a home. Damien was standing at the window with his back to her, still in the same clothes he had worn 3 days earlier. He looked like he hadn't slept or eaten since leaving the hospital. "You came," he said without turning around. "Sophie is asking for you," Isabel said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "She drew you a picture and wants to show it to you. She thinks she did something wrong to make you disappear." "I can't," Damien said quietly. "Can't what?" "I can't watch another child I love die of leukemia. I can't go through that again." Isabel felt her anger dissolve into understanding. "So you're abandoning her while she's still alive? You're letting your fear of future pain cause present pain. It's better this way. She's young enough to forget about me." "No, it's not better, and no, she won't forget," Isabel said fiercely. "Sophie doesn't understand why the man who promised to help her get better suddenly vanished. She thinks it's her fault." Damien finally turned around, and Isabel was shocked by his appearance. His face was haggard, his eyes were red with exhaustion, and he looked like he had aged years in the past 3 days. "Damien, what are you doing to yourself?" "I'm protecting myself. I'm protecting you and Sophie from the inevitable disappointment when I prove I'm not capable of being what you need." "And what do you think we need?" "You need someone like David, selfless, brave, committed to healing others. I'm none of those things." Isabel walked across the enormous living room and stood directly in front of Damien, forcing him to look at her. "David was all of those things," she said softly. "But he was also human. He made mistakes. He had fears. He sometimes doubted himself. The difference was that he didn't let his fears stop him from loving people. David was a better man than I'll ever be. Maybe. But Sophie isn't asking for David. She's asking for you. She's asking for the man who reads her dinosaur books, who explains complicated things in ways she can understand, who makes her laugh during chemotherapy sessions." "What if I can't save her? What if you can? What if your love and support help her fight harder? What if abandoning her now is exactly the wrong choice at exactly the wrong time?" Damien sank into a chair, overwhelmed by emotion. Isabel, I've spent 15 years avoiding situations where I might care about someone because I couldn't handle losing them. But 3 weeks with Sophie undid all of that. I love her like she's my own daughter. I know you do. And she loves you like you're her father. That's what terrifies me. Isabel knelt beside his chair and took his hands. David used to say that love isn't a guarantee against loss. It's what makes loss bearable. He said that every moment of joy with someone you love is worth the risk of eventual pain. Easy for him to say. He didn't have to watch his own sister die, no. But he had to watch dozens of children die despite his best efforts to save them. Some doctors quit pediatric oncology because they can't handle the emotional toll. David chose to stay because he said the children and families needed advocates who understood their pain. Damien looked into Isabel's eyes and saw the same strength that had carried her through years of struggle as a single mother. How do you do it? How do you love Sophie so completely when you know how dangerous her condition is? Because the alternative is not loving her, not fighting for her, would be a betrayal of everything she is and everything she could become. Sophie deserves to be loved fully, whether she lives for 5 more years or 50 more years. And what about us? What about whatever this is developing between us? Isabel hesitated. That's more complicated. Why? Because Sophie needs you in her life, regardless of what happens between us romantically. I won't risk your relationship with her by pushing for something you're not ready for. What if I am ready? What if these 3 days away from you both have shown me that I want to be part of your family permanently? Then you need to prove it by being present for the difficult times, not just the good ones. Sophie is facing weeks of intensive treatment that might not work. If you're going to be part of our lives, you need to stay through all of it. Damien stood up and walked back to the window, looking out at the city lights. If I go back to the hospital with you tonight, I'm committing to seeing this through completely. No more running away when things get scary. That's exactly what I'm asking for. And if Sophie doesn't make it, then we'll grieve together and we'll honor her memory by making sure her life had meaning. Damien turned back to Isabel with tears in his eyes. I'm not sure I'm strong enough for this. You don't have to be strong enough alone. That's what family is for. Sharing the load when it's too heavy for one person to carry. For the first time in 3 days, Damien felt hope battling with his fear. Okay, let's go see Sophie. As they rode the elevator down from his penthouse, Damien made a silent vow to himself and to David Morrison's memory. He would not abandon Sophie and Isabel the way he had abandoned his own capacity for love after Sarah's death. But the real test of his commitment was yet to come. When they arrived at the hospital, Sophie was awake despite the late hour, listlessly playing with toys that no longer seemed to interest her. When she saw Damien walk into her room, her face lit up with joy that made his heart break. Damien, you came back. I drew you a picture. Sophie held up a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures labeled Mommy, Sophie, and Damien standing next to a building labeled Hospital. Above them, she had drawn a rainbow and a smiling sun. We're all together helping me get better, Sophie explained proudly. Damien took the picture with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the simple faith it represented. It's beautiful, Sophie. I'm sorry I was away. Were you scared? Sophie asked, with her characteristic directness. Yes, I was scared. It's okay to be scared. Daddy used to tell me that being brave means doing the right thing, even when you're scared. Damien looked at this remarkable 5-year-old who was teaching him lessons about courage that he should have learned decades earlier. Your daddy was right, and the right thing is for me to be here with you while you get better. Are you going to stay this time? Damien glanced at Isabel, who was watching the interaction with tears in her eyes. Yes, Sophie, I'm going to stay. But even as he made that promise, Damien had no idea that Sophie's condition was about to get much worse before it got better, and that his commitment would be tested in ways that would either break him completely or forge him into the man David Morrison had always believed he could become. Transformation Redemption. The next 3 months tested Damien's commitment in ways he never could have imagined. Sophie's condition deteriorated rapidly, requiring increasingly aggressive treatments that left her weak, nauseous, and barely recognizable as the vibrant child he had first met. But instead of fleeing from the difficulty, as he had done 3 days earlier, Damien threw himself completely into Sophie's care. He rearranged his entire life around her treatment schedule, moved temporarily into a hotel near the hospital, and became a constant presence in her room. Damien's business partners were baffled by his transformation. Richard Sterling confronted him during one of their increasingly rare meetings. "You're destroying everything we've built," Richard said angrily. "You've missed 3 board meetings, cancelled 2 major acquisitions, and turned down a pharmaceutical merger that would have made us another $1 billion. "Good," Damien replied without looking up from the medical journals he was studying. "To better understand Sophie's condition, maybe it's time to build something that actually helps people instead of exploiting them. This is about that woman and her kid, isn't it? Damien, you can write a check for their medical care without dismantling your entire corporate empire. It's not about writing a check, Richard. It's about becoming someone worthy of being in their lives. You're having a midlife crisis. This phase will pass, and you'll regret destroying everything your father built." Damien finally looked up from his reading. "My father built an empire on human suffering. If dismantling it is what's required to save one little girl's life, then it's a bargain." Richard left that meeting convinced that Damien had lost his mind, but Damien had never felt more clear-headed in his life. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Spending 18 hours a day in a children's hospital forced Damien to confront the reality of how most families experienced medical crises. He met parents who had sold their homes to pay for treatments, who worked multiple jobs while caring for sick children, who faced impossible choices between medical care and basic survival. "I never understood," Damien told Isabel one evening, as they watched Sophie sleep fitfully after a particularly brutal day of chemotherapy. "I thought everyone had access to the same care Sarah received. I had no idea that families like yours were forced to choose between their dignity and their children's lives. Most wealthy people don't understand," Isabel replied. "The system is designed to keep you from seeing how others suffer. Well, I see it now, and I can't unsee it." Damien began using his wealth and connections to help other families in the children's cancer ward. He quietly paid off medical debts, arranged for experimental treatments, and connected families with resources they never knew existed. But he did it all anonymously, not wanting recognition for what he saw as basic human decency. More importantly, Damien began restructuring Blackwood Pharmaceuticals from the ground up. He ended the practice of acquiring smaller companies just to shut down their research, stopped hiking prices on essential medications, and began funding open-source research that would benefit all patients rather than just company profits. "You're committing corporate suicide," his CFO warned during a particularly contentious board meeting. "I'm committing corporate ethics," Damien corrected. "If the company can't be profitable while helping people instead of exploiting them, then maybe it doesn't deserve to exist." But the most profound change in Damien was his relationship with Sophie and Isabel. As Sophie's condition worsened, Damien proved his commitment by being present for every difficult moment, holding her during painful procedures, reading to her when she was too weak to hold books, and maintaining hope when the medical staff began preparing them for the worst. "Damien," Sophie said weakly one afternoon during a brief period when she was awake and alert, "are you going to be my daddy now?" The question hit Damien like lightning. He looked at Isabel, who nodded encouragingly. "Would you like me to be?" Damien asked carefully. "Yes, I asked Daddy David if it was okay, and he said yes." "You asked him how?" "I talk to him sometimes when I'm sleeping. He said he's happy that someone who knew him is taking care of me and Mommy." Damien felt tears streaming down his face. "Then yes, Sophie, I would be honored to be your daddy." From that day forward, Damien stopped thinking of himself as a wealthy benefactor helping strangers. He was Sophie's father and Isabel's partner, fighting alongside them in the most important battle of their lives. The financial cost of his transformation was enormous. Damien's net worth dropped by nearly half as he sold assets to fund the restructuring of his company and pay for charitable work. His former friends ostracized him for abandoning the ruthless business practices that had defined their social circle. But Damien discovered that what he was building with Sophie and Isabel was worth more than everything he was giving up. "Are you sure about this?" Isabel asked one evening as they reviewed documents that would transfer majority ownership of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals to a non-profit foundation dedicated to pediatric cancer research. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Damien replied. "David Morrison dedicated his career to helping children like Sophie. The least I can do is dedicate my fortune to the same cause. David would be proud of what you're becoming. I hope so. I want to be worthy of his daughter's love." 3 weeks later, Sophie's latest round of test results brought news that changed everything. The experimental treatment was working. Her cancer markers had dropped dramatically, and for the first time in months, her doctors were cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis. "She's going to make it," Dr. Harper told them with tears in her eyes. "I can't promise there won't be setbacks, but Sophie is responding better than we dared hope." Damien, Isabel, and Sophie celebrated by having a pizza party in Sophie's hospital room, complete with balloons and a cake that read, "Sophie beats cancer." "I knew I would get better," Sophie announced matter-of-factly as she blew out her candles. "How did you know?" Isabel asked. "Because Daddy David told me that Damien would help me fight, and daddies always keep their promises." That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, surrounded by get-well cards from other patients in the ward, Damien and Isabel stepped out onto the hospital's rooftop garden. "We did it," Isabel said, still hardly believing the news. "Sophie did it," Damien corrected. "She fought harder than any adult would have in the same situation. But you kept your promise to stay, even when things looked hopeless, even when it would have been easier to walk away." "I learned something these past months," Damien said, taking Isabel's hands. "Love isn't about avoiding pain or guaranteeing outcomes. It's about choosing to be present for whatever comes, good or bad." "Is that what this is between us? Love?" Damien looked into Isabel's eyes and saw his future reflected there. "Yes, I love you, Isabel. I love Sophie. I want to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of being part of your family. Even though we're not the glamorous lifestyle you're used to, especially because of that, you've taught me that a real life is built on love and service, not luxury. And power." Isabel smiled and kissed him gently. "David used to say that love was the greatest adventure anyone could have. Then I'm ready for that adventure if you'll have me. We'll have you, Damien Blackwood Morrison. Welcome to our family." 6 months after Sophie's recovery, Damien had become a completely different man from the cold billionaire who had attended a human trafficking auction to network with business associates. The transformation was so complete that people who had known him before barely recognized him. Damien and Isabel were married in a small ceremony at the Children's Hospital where Sophie had been treated, surrounded by the medical staff who had become their extended family. Sophie served as maid of honor, wearing a bright yellow dress and a crown of flowers to celebrate her hair growing back. Do you, Damien Blackwood, take Isabel Morrison to be your wife, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse?" asked Dr. Harper, who had been ordained online specifically to perform their ceremony. "I do," Damien said, looking into Isabel's eyes. "And I promise to love Sophie as my own daughter, to honor David's memory through my actions, and to spend my life serving others the way you've taught me. Do you, Isabel Morrison, take Damien Blackwood to be your husband, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse?" "I do," Isabel replied, tears streaming down her face. "And I promise to help you become the man David always believed you could be." When they kissed to seal their marriage, Sophie cheered loudly, and every person in the room was crying with joy. Their honeymoon was spent volunteering at a clinic in Guatemala that Damien had funded to provide free cancer treatment to children in Central America. Sophie came with them, healthy enough to travel, but still requiring regular checkups. "This is the best honeymoon ever," Sophie announced as she helped distribute toys to children receiving chemotherapy. "We're helping other kids like me get better." Watching his new daughter comfort children facing the same battle she had won, Damien felt a completeness he had never experienced. This was what David Morrison had meant when he said that love was the most powerful healing force in the universe. "You know what I realized?" Damien told Isabel as they walked through the clinic together. "What's that?" "That night at the auction, I thought I was saving you from James Hartwell. But really, you and Sophie were saving me from becoming a monster like my father." "We saved each other," Isabel corrected, "and we're going to keep saving each other for the rest of our lives." Their marriage wasn't without challenges. Damien had to learn how to be a father to a precocious 7-year-old who had strong opinions about everything from bedtime stories to social justice. Isabel had to adjust to having resources that seemed unlimited after years of desperate poverty. Both of them had to navigate the complex grief of honoring David's memory while building their own new family. But every challenge they faced was met with the strength they drew from their shared commitment to love and service. Damien's business transformation was equally dramatic. Blackwood Pharmaceuticals became a model for ethical corporate behavior, proving that companies could be both profitable and humanitarian. The David Morrison Foundation, funded by Damien's personal fortune, became one of the world's leading supporters of pediatric cancer research. "You've changed the entire pharmaceutical industry," Dr. Harper told Damien during a medical conference where he was receiving an award for corporate philanthropy. "Other companies are following your model, and children around the world are benefiting." "It's what David would have wanted," Damien replied. "Every child deserves the same fighting chance that Sophie had." But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Margaret Blackwood, Damien's grandmother, who was in the final stages of Alzheimer's disease, had a brief moment of clarity during one of his visits. "Damien," she said, focusing on his face with effort, "you look different, happier." "I am happier, Grandma. I have a family now." "I'm proud of you," Margaret said clearly. "You became the man I always hoped you would be." It was the last coherent conversation Damien would have with his grandmother, but her words carried him through her death 3 weeks later. At Margaret's funeral, Damien spoke about how love had transformed his life from empty luxury to meaningful service. "My grandmother raised me to believe that wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege," Damien said to the gathered mourners. "It took me 34 years to understand what she meant. Wealth means nothing unless it's used to help others, to heal suffering, to create hope where none existed before." After the funeral, Isabel found Damien standing alone in the cemetery. "She would have loved Sophie," Damien said quietly. "She did love Sophie, through you. Do you think David would have approved of us? Of me taking his place in your lives?" Isabel took Damien's hand and pointed to a rainbow that had appeared over the cemetery despite the clear sky. "That's David's answer," she said. "He's telling us he's happy that we found each other." 5 years after their wedding, the Blackwood Morrison family had become a symbol of hope for families facing pediatric cancer around the world. Their foundation had funded research that led to breakthrough treatments. Their advocacy had changed. Healthcare policies and their love story had inspired countless others to believe in second chances. Sophie, now 12 years old and 5 years cancer-free, had grown into a remarkable young woman who wanted to follow in her father David's footsteps as a pediatric oncologist. She volunteered at the children's hospital where she'd been treated, offering comfort and encouragement to families beginning their own cancer journeys. "I want to be like Daddy David and help kids get better," Sophie told her parents as they reviewed her application to a prestigious science academy. "But I also want to be like you, Damien, and make sure all families can afford the help they need." Damien felt his heart swell with pride. "Your father David would be so proud of the woman you're becoming." "Both my fathers would be proud," Sophie corrected with a smile. Isabel was completing her PhD in social work, specializing in healthcare, advocacy for underserved populations. Her doctoral dissertation examined how corporate philanthropy could address systemic inequalities in medical care. Research made possible by her unique perspective on both sides of the wealth divide. "I'm thinking about running for Congress," Isabel told Damien one evening as they worked together in their home office, reviewing grant applications for the foundation. "To change healthcare policy from the inside, to make sure no other mother has to choose between her dignity and her child's life." Damien looked up from the application he was reading, a request for funding from a family whose son needed the same experimental treatment that had saved Sophie. David would say, "That's exactly the kind of fight worth having." "What do you think?" "I think," Damien said, pulling Isabel into his arms, "that I want to support you in changing the world, the same way you supported me in changing myself." Their love story had come full circle. The desperate mother who had been forced to auction herself to save her child had become a powerful advocate for healthcare reform. The cold billionaire who had attended that auction for business networking had become a humanitarian whose foundation was revolutionizing pediatric cancer care. But their greatest achievement was the family they had built together, a testament to the power of love to heal generational wounds and create hope from despair. On Sophie's 13th birthday, they visited David Morrison's grave together, a tradition they had maintained every year. "Hi, Daddy David," Sophie said, placing fresh flowers on his headstone. "I'm officially a teenager now. Damien says that means I get to have opinions about everything, and Mom says that means I have to be responsible for my choices." Damien and Isabel exchanged amused glances as Sophie continued her annual report to her biological father. "The foundation helped 2,847 kids this year get treatments they couldn't afford. Mom is going to run for Congress to fix the laws that make medicine too expensive. And Damien says when I'm old enough, I can join the foundation's board and help decide how to spend the money." Sophie paused, then added, "I know you're proud of Damien for taking care of me and Mom. He loves us the way you would have loved us. Thank you for sending him to us." As they walked back to their car, Sophie skipping ahead while Damien and Isabel walked hand in hand, Damien reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect happiness. "Do you ever think about that night?" Isabel asked, as if reading his thoughts. "The auction?" "Every day," Damien replied, not with shame anymore, but with gratitude. Gratitude. For the desperation that brought us together, for Sophie's illness that taught me what really matters, for David's memory that guided us toward love instead of bitterness, and for the second chances, especially for the second chances. That evening, As they celebrated Sophie's birthday with a family party that included Dr. Harper, several nurses from the Children's Hospital, and 24 other families whose children had been helped by the foundation, Damien made an announcement. "Sophie," he said, standing up with a glass of sparkling cider, "your mom and I have a birthday surprise for you." "What kind of surprise?" "The kind that means you're going to be a big sister." Sophie's eyes widened with delight. "Mom's having a baby in about 6 months, Isabel confirmed, laughing at Sophie's expression of pure joy. Sophie launched herself into her parents' arms, and the three of them held each other tightly while their friends and family cheered around them. "This baby is so lucky," Sophie declared. "They're going to have the best parents ever, and they'll grow up knowing that love can fix anything." What a touching ending. Love can arise from the most unlikely circumstances, and sometimes destiny has bigger plans than we can imagine. If you believe in destiny and second chances, don't forget to subscribe for more exciting stories like this. Later that night, after their guests had gone home and Sophie had fallen asleep surrounded by birthday presents, Damien and Isabel sat together in their living room, marveling at how completely their lives had changed. "We're going to have a baby," Isabel said, still amazed by the news herself. "A baby who will grow up knowing that their father was saved by their sisters, a courage and their mother's love, and who will never doubt that they're wanted and cherished." Damien placed his hand on Isabel's still flat stomach. "This child will inherit a very different legacy than I did. Instead of wealth built on exploitation, they'll inherit a foundation dedicated to healing. Instead of emotional isolation, they'll grow up surrounded by love. Do you think they'll understand how their family came to be? When they're old enough, we'll tell them the whole truth, how desperation brought us together, how love transformed us, and how their big sister Sophie taught us both what it means to be brave. And what will we tell them about that night at the auction?" Damien considered the question seriously. "We'll tell them that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best outcomes. That dignity can be temporarily compromised, but never permanently destroyed. And that love has the power to transform even the darkest circumstances into sources of light for others." Isabel smiled and kissed her husband. "I love you, Damien Blackwood Morrison. And I love you, Isabel Blackwood Morrison. Thank you for saving me from becoming my father. Thank you for teaching me that real wealth isn't what you own, it's what you give away." As they prepared for bed, Damien reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them from a degrading auction to this moment of perfect family happiness. Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources, and love could bloom even in soil poisoned by desperation and inequality. Their story proved that second chances were possible for those brave enough to change, that love could heal generational wounds, and that the most beautiful families could grow from the most painful beginnings. The boy or girl who would be born to the Blackwood Morrison family in 6 months would inherit not just financial resources, but the knowledge that their parents' love story was also a story of redemption, transformation, and the triumph of hope over despair. And someday, when that child was old enough to understand, they would learn the most important lesson of their parents' lives. That love is not about finding someone perfect, but about choosing to see the potential for goodness in someone broken and helping them heal into the best version of themselves. That is how a human trafficking auction became a love story that changed not just 3 lives, but every life their love touched for generations to come.